If you enjoy stories like this, true accounts of courage, sacrifice, and history that changed our world, consider subscribing. All-American boy Hector Polla grew up in Pulaski County, Missouri. His parents, Lodovico Vico and Madalena, were Italian immigrants. Vico worked as a gardener. Hector was an average kid. He had a paper route and liked to go fishing. In high school, he went out for basketball and football, and played clarinet in the band. After high school, Hector spent 2 years at the Wentworth Military Academy in Lexington, Missouri, before earning an appointment to West Point. Marcellus Hartman, a high school classmate of Hector's, later told John Jorza, "I think it went through Vico's mind that here I am a gardener, and my son is graduating from the U.S. Military Academy." After infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia, Polla, along with Chiene and Neininger, arrived in the Philippines and joined the 57th Infantry Regiment on November 20, 1941. With its tropical setting and low-cost off-base living, the Philippines had been a prize assignment during the pre-war years. Shortly after arriving, Polla dropped off a few dress uniform items at the sanitary steam laundry in Manila to be cleaned and pressed, and settled in to savor the life of a young officer in the exotic Orient. But he and his 2 classmates had little time for this. On December 8, as the attack on Pearl Harbor was underway across the international dateline, the Japanese struck the Philippines. 2 days later, the invasion began. Filipino and American defenders were knocked reeling, and within a few weeks the trio was among the outnumbered troops cornered in doomed Bataan. Chiene and Neininger both lost their lives in January 1942. Chiene was awarded a posthumous Distinguished Service Cross, and Neininger's posthumous Medal of Honor was the first to be awarded to a U.S. Army soldier in a ground action during World War II. For Polla, promoted to first lieutenant on January 16, the Battle of Bataan continued. On April 9, 2 months to the day after he had risked his life to hold the American line, time finally ran out, and the last line could no longer be held. The American and Filipino defenders of Bataan surrendered, and Polla became one of some 60,000 men to face the 60-mile Bataan Death March, enduring unspeakable atrocities along the way. Men were beaten or shot for stopping to get a drink of water or aiding failing comrades. Finally reaching Cabanatuan on June 2, 1942, Polla and the others faced an uncertain future, with no idea of how long they'd be confined. Polla's earliest notations in the small notebooks, generally undated, include lists of names and addresses of fellow inmates, the food they received from their captors, quotes from radio news reports listened to surreptitiously, and random thoughts, be sure roll calls are accurate, camp commander objects to assembles, illegal, excess rice in garbage pits to be reduced. Noticed by Nips. His more systematic, day-by-day diary entries would not begin until the first day of 1943, by which time he knew he was in for a long haul. Polla's early entries paint a mundane picture of camp life, at odds with virtually all post-war accounts of survivors who told of conditions at Cabanatuan as being miserable beyond measure, with brutal treatment by its guards. On January 5, for example, Polla wrote, "Bridge. 1 banana issued. 1 pack American cigarettes. Traded old golds for camels." February 18 was marked by Bridge and a Jap inspection of clothing, worse than at school. But it all turned out okay. He was issued 2 new shirts and a pair of pants. He ended his day by listening to the radio. On March 17, the Japanese passed out fish oil for shoe shining and a ration of tooth powder for every 3 men. Polla goes on to say that there was a drawing for drawers and towel. "I got the towel." The next day, between the bridge game and an afternoon nap, Polla notes being issued 3 limes. That evening, there was a musical show of the sort that alternated with movie night several times a week through 1943 and, with less frequency, into 1944. Looking at what he wrote, and where he wrote it, raises questions that will never be answered. Were Polla's bland descriptions of bridge, entertainment, and citrus fruit toned down for fear of what punishment might ensue if his diaries were discovered? If so, one wonders why he penned his poetry, some of which contained descriptions of cruelty and abuse, in the larger, hard-to-hide notebooks. Were his bland descriptions simply factual details recited by a benumbed man who had accepted his circumstances? Was the man who lightened many tasks with his cheerful manner just trying to maintain his own sanity? John Jauser suggests that Hector undertook his writing projects and diary keeping as a means of maintaining his mental acuity. Polla's diary entries rarely ebbed on the darker side. On April 6, 1943, though, he mentioned that he had learned from a guard that 2 men had escaped, but noted nothing of their fate. One rare graphic description of his captor's strong arm came just a few days later, on April 14, when he wrote tersely about a man who had been caught attempting an escape. He was supposed to be shot, head shaved, spared, Polla wrote. To this, he added, "Rat crawled on my head." Is Polla perhaps telling us that he was the man whose head was shaved? However, he pulled no punches as he wrote in verse about 10 men executed for the transgressions of one. The 10 they knew that they must die, althos for truth they knew not why, Polla wrote. Their life had run its brief short span. They were paying the debt of another man. I want to go home. Polla's poetry is often wistful in tone, such as when he wrote, "They write of the East as enthralling, and that's why I started to roam. But now I hear the Occident calling. Oh Lord, how I want to go home." The theme of abandonment also crops up. In his poem Scuttlebutt, probably dating from the summer of 1942, Polla borrowed a line from popular culture when he wrote that a friend of a pal of mine told of a confidential report that the Yanks and the tanks are coming. In fact, they are almost here. Indeed, since January 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and the U.S. Army chain of command had repeatedly promised the POWs that help was on the way. Those making the promises knew it was impossible, but those in Cabanatuan at first thought that their incarceration might be short. Polla ended Scuttlebutt by writing that the gossip of old maids couldn't keep up with the rumors in Cabanatuan. Polla wrote often of food, a fixation common to people on greatly reduced diets. Steamed rice was the staple, and the prisoners were also often served lugao, the rice porridge common to the Philippines. In their early days of confinement, they ate creamed corn and canned salmon, probably from captured American food supplies. As the men of Cabanatuan neared their first Christmas in captivity, captured canned goods ran out, but the Japanese allowed gifts to reach the prisoners. Polla recalled that a delegation of Manila women came to the camp with such treats as cigars, cigarettes, and candy. He does not say who these women were, although had they been from the Red Cross, he would have mentioned this, because he notes on the same page that International Red Cross packages with candy bars, soap, and canned goods also reached Cabanatuan ahead of Christmas 1942. Through the early months of 1943, Polla wrote of eggs being served frequently for breakfast, and of oranges, limes, and Red Cross sugar often being distributed. On May 10, he savored the first mango of the season. Into 1944, Spam, jam, and corned beef arrived in Red Cross parcels. The men also maintained a farm outside the main prison compound. In his diary, Polla recalled raking cornstalks and being in charge of the camote, sweet potato, planting detail in the spring of 1943. Polla's weight, as an indication of his level of nourishment, declined from 163 pounds in October 1942 to 156 in February 1943 and stabilized in the low 150s through July 1944, the last time he noted it. There was a hospital of sorts at Cabanatuan, overseen by a U.S. Army doctor, Colonel James Gillespie. Army Medical Department historian George Cressman has written that it lacked the supplies and drugs to effectively treat patients. However, Polla wrote at length about an early 1943 malaria affliction and that he received quinine routinely. He also often mentions other medications, including an antibiotic, sulfanilamide. In April 1944, he received a cholera vaccination and a month later he was back on quinine for another bout of malaria. Aspirin was available and circulated among the prisoners. Valentine's Day but no Valentine, Polla wrote on February 14, 1943. Stayed in the sack most of the day. Got 2 aspirins from Nopping. This was his first mention of Warrant Officer Joseph Nopping, an aviation engineer from Palisades Park, New Jersey, who would play an important part in Polla's story 2 years later. holidays in hell. The Japanese regularly paid the prisoners small sums in Philippine pesos, which had a pre-war value of about 2 cents in American dollars. The funds were kept in Japanese postal savings accounts. According to Polla's running total, which reached 470 pesos by October 1944, he started out receiving 5 pesos monthly, but in October 1943, company-grade officers like himself got a raise to 40 pesos. With their money, the prisoners were able to shop at the camp commissary, buying fresh fruit, canned coffee, toiletries, tobacco, and even fresh eggs. Polla was a regular consumer of sugared peanuts, which sold for 15 to 18 centavos a bag. Eggs fluctuated at a little less than 1 peso a dozen, about the same as the cost of a notebook. Polla documented holiday celebrations. On Thanksgiving 1943, he reported having had a very good supper. Both Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve in 1943 passed congenially with cake and coffee. On April 29, 1943, the men were served hotcakes for breakfast in celebration of Emperor Hirohito's birthday. The same day 1 year later, however, was what he called a usual day. Polla did not mention his own birthday in 1943, but on September 30, 1944, as he turned 28, he reported eating cornbread and peanut butter. Easter 1943 was celebrated with a cup of sugar in the ration allotment, while on Easter 1944, he'd attended sunrise services and broke out my new uniform. By his account, the Cabanatuan inmates stayed entertained. Performances by the camp theatre companies and glee club occurred regularly in 1943, and he reviewed them. He deemed the glee club show on February 21 very good, while the variety program on March 6 was merely pretty good, and the film Tobacco Road on March 30 was a not too good. Movies, from the Marx Brothers to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, probably 16mm prints captured from American bases, were shown several times a week, often interspersed with Japanese newsreels. On September 12, 1943, Polla wrote movie, Judy Canova in Pudd'nhead enjoyed by all even though it was a second-rate movie. 10 days later, the 1931 Charlie Chaplin film City Lights earned a very silly from Polla. On October 21, he wrote, movie all in Japanese except a cartoon, Looney Tunes. Cartoon only thing worthwhile. Reading Polla's many movie reviews, like reading page upon page of a bridge and citrus lifestyle, is perplexing. It's hard to square his journal's account with the unanimously hellish stories of treatment at Cabanatuan that have emerged since the war. Was he trying to focus on the few glimmers of a bright side? Perhaps an answer to this question can be found in his penmanship and his language. By the summer of 1943, Polla's handwriting had become more careless, as though he was running out of steam. His entries grew shorter, now usually being just one line. Indeed, for most of August, and sporadically into October, the phrase usual day was repeated, with no further comment, day after day. Letters from home reached the prisoners at Cabanatuan only sporadically at first, with a Christmas letter from Polla's mother finally arriving in February 1943. Nearly a year later, in his January 1944 entries, he mentioned mail several times, noting that he received 2 letters in a day, one from his parents and another from a friend named K, from whom he received several letters. By June, it was a usual day when 250 letters arrived at camp. In reply, inmates were permitted to mail postcards with a 50-word message limit. Among those to his mother that survived the war, his card of July 22, 1944, said, "Don't worry about me, send sunglasses when you can." Perhaps his sanguine descriptions of Cabanatuan were in part designed to shield his mother from the anguish she would feel if she were ever to see his notebooks. Meanwhile, even as the mail for the men started flooding in, the prisoners themselves began flowing out. The Japanese started pulling men out of Cabanatuan to be sent to Japan in the work details. The most able-bodied of the men were, in fact, being conscripted as slave laborers, and were transported on vessels aboard which the conditions were so cruel and unsanitary that they came to be known as hell ships. Polla first mentioned a detail leaving for Japan on March 6, 1944. By the summer, the departing work details became more frequent, with the men often rousted around midnight to leave in the wee hours of the morning. Because they never returned, those left behind had no idea what they'd undergone. Indeed, there was reason for optimism. By September 1944, as the prisoners marked 27 months of imprisonment, the fortunes of the once invincible Imperial Japanese Army had ebbed and turned. Japan had been defeated from the Solomons to the Marianas, and General Douglas MacArthur's promise of a return to the Philippines loomed large as an imminent reality. For Hector Polla, this was best recalled in his September 21 entry. After writing usual day dozens of times, he was able to write unusual day. American planes flew over, he explained. One Jap plane shot down, excitement running wild. 2 planes flew low overhead at a high rate of speed. They seemed to fly unmolested and at will. I'm confident of early freedom. He optimistically added probably have birthday dinner in Manila, but that was not to be. On September 30th, as he celebrated his 28th birthday, freedom was not his to grasp. On October 15th, it was Hector Polla's turn to join a departing detail. His diary entry for that day, in the form of a note to his mother, was his last. Leave tonight at midnight. Giving my notebooks to Nopping to send on to you, he told her, referencing Joseph Nopping, the man whose name had first appeared in his diary 20 months earlier. I am in good health. I don't believe that we will leave the islands, but if we do, you may rest assured that I will get along all right. I have been able to so far, and I will continue to do so. 5 days later, General MacArthur waded ashore on the island of Leyte at the head of his 6th Army, and the liberation of the Philippines began. Based on eyewitness accounts later compiled by the U.S. Army, a reasonably accurate picture of Polla's subsequent experiences can be pieced together. After 2 months at Manila's Bilibid prison, Polla was crammed into the filthy hold of the Orioku Maru in Manila Harbor, along with 1,555 other Americans and 64 prisoners of war of other nationalities. On December 13, 1944, the ship departed for Japan. 2 days later, though, like many Japanese ships in Philippine waters, the Orioku Maru, unmarked as a POW transport, became a target of American aircraft. As it sank, 270 prisoners died. Polla was among the survivors who were reloaded aboard the Anura Maru on December 27. The ship reached Takao, Formosa, now Kaohsiung, Taiwan, on New Year's Day 1945, and was still docked in port on January 9 when American bombers attacked it, heavily damaging, although not disabling, the ship and killing more than 400 POWs. But Hector Polla once again beat the odds. On January 21, his luck ran out. His own undated poem, Requiem, provides a somber epitaph: God rest ye dead and rest ye well, 'tis best ye be freed from hell. Messages from the grave. In July 1945, Vico and Madalena Polla received a letter from Major General Edward F. Witzel, the U.S. Army's soon-to-be Adjutant General, who wrote that their son had died in the sinking of the Orioku Maru in December. In October 1946, Witzel wrote again, amending his earlier report to tell them that Hector had survived the December sinking, only to die on January 9, 1945. But this was not to be the end of the Polla's emotional roller coaster ride. Official documents and letters to Vico and Madalena, which John Jauser shared with me, show that the Army had a difficult time sorting out the details of the men who died aboard the hell ships. The date of Hector's death was amended several times in the years after the war as more and more eyewitnesses were located and interviewed, and as more Japanese records were located and cross-checked with other information. The final determination finally came on March 28, 1951. It was concluded that Hector had died in an attack on the Anura Maru in port on January 21, 1945, that killed some 400 additional POWs and permanently crippled the ship. However, it was noted that his remains could not have been recovered. A grisly handwritten note added that after the disabling of the Anura Maru, the remains recovered at Takao, Formosa,